In today's episode of Spiraling Up, we'll take a look at the cringier side of LinkedIn, and then we're talking to podcast expert John Tyreman so that we can bust some myths about podcasting in the professional services space. Welcome, everyone. This is Spiraling Up with Hinge. All right, welcome everybody to Spiraling Up, the marketing podcast that puts a playful twist on the usual marketing podcast. If you're a marketer or a business leader in the professional services world, then you are in the right place. What do we do on this podcast? Well, in each episode, we'll cover notable stories in the world of marketing, and then we'll invite some leading voices in the industry to play games or take on some hard challenges to share their honest insights on what works and what doesn't work in the space of professional services marketing. We are early in this podcast experience. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Jill Pope, Mary Blanche Kramer. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
MB, I know that you were just traveling in London, England.
I was.
How was that trip? I know that Joe and I are especially jealous because Joe and I are both big English Premier League fans. So the only thing I'm thinking about is, did you go see any soccer games? I'm assuming the answer is no. But tell us, what did you do? How was your trip?
It was great. We had so much fun. I do a trip every year with one of my best girlfriends from growing up. We just pick a different place every year. And this year was London. So we had a great time. Lots of shopping, retail therapy, if you will. But we went to the theater. So got to see a play. That was fun. Did a double.
What play did you guys see?
Harry Potter.
Yes.
And Vicar's Child. We were big Harry Potter nerds as kids. So naturally we had to just come full circle. Honestly, it was great. Some of the like motion mechanics and kind of like little tricks that they did.
Sure.
Really cool stuff. We did a tour, like a double-decker tour bus, ate at some great restaurants, beat bopped around, did kind of like an impromptu day trip to Belgium, which honestly was probably my favorite part of the trip. But yeah, it was a good time.
I love that. Just being able to hop over to another country real fast, hop back, no big deal. That's cool. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you got some R&R and some time to refresh. Welcome back. Joe, everything going good for you?
Yeah. Other than if you're talking soccer, my team lost in a very tragic fashion. And I thought you were going to go there when you were teeing up MB. But, I think it's great. And one thing, MB, that stands out to me, and I know you've been a big advocate for this, and you talk to some of our other colleagues and so forth, is the idea of taking these types of impromptu trips or impromptu activities involving yourself in like this R&R type of process so you can rest, refresh, and then come back and ready to roll. It's so cool to, even just hear this rundown of how you guys have had such a good time doing this.
Well, I imagine that today's pivotal story does not have a lot to do with your trip in London. Hopefully you were able to stay off the internet and specifically maybe stay off of LinkedIn. Why don't you tell us about what our pivotal story is about today?
Sure. All right. So Austin, you sent around a funny video earlier in the week, and that's really what sparked the topic for today's pivotal story. So today we're going to be talking all things LinkedIn. Now, as professional services marketers, we know the importance that LinkedIn plays as a social platform. But in pop culture, LinkedIn has been known to have a bit of a funny reputation, honestly. But before I say more, Austin, how about you pull up the video that you sent around to kind of kick us off here?
All right, let's pull it up and take a watch at this.
My ex moved on within a week with my best friend's mom. And at first, I was totally crushed. But the more that I thought about it, I realized that I had failed to conduct a proper competitive analysis. Here's how that heartbreak taught me everything that I need to know about B2B sales.
B2B sales.
1, I assumed I was the only vendor in the pipeline. Nope. Barbara was there. 2, I neglected to assess the competitive landscape. Sometimes your customer is wanting to go with a more mature option, somebody that's been around for longer, like your best friend's mom. Great salespeople know that deals don't go cold without reason. And if they suddenly walk away, chances are they found a better alternative. And sometimes it's Barbara, hashtag B2B sales, hashtag know your market, hashtag love where you work.
Had to get in that third hashtag.
It's always that one.
Okay.
Oh, that's good. So I mean, it's true, right? They can be a little odd on LinkedIn sometimes. And I think particularly here, the stretch to drawing on real world examples like this one, they are sometimes over the top. But what do you guys think? Is LinkedIn cringe? Joe, let's start with you. What's your take?
There's a channel on Instagram called Best of LinkedIn that has become a mainstay in the DMs of, I believe, the three of us, and sharing some of the best examples in terms of some of the more outrageous ways that folks are expressing themselves on the platform. One that stood out to me recently was a gentleman named Peter, whose title, and obviously I'm not going to go any further than that, but his title is Search Engine Optimization Specialist and Freelancer. And it starts with, "I have a secret." Okay, let's hear it, Peter. "Most people are not even aware that this is a real thing, but since 2015, I have struggled with peeing in public restrooms."
Stop it.
3 sentences in, and I know more about Peter than I think anybody would ever want to know about Peter. But yes, he did find a way to tie it into a recent trip to Europe, which is why I think this stood out to me. And I'm absolutely not going to ask you about your preferences, MB, but I think in general, the challenge with Peter and the fact that he has to reference urination as a part of a business networking site is already showing something that should just never exist. I don't even think it should exist on any social media platform, let alone LinkedIn.
It's a bridge too far.
It's just very far.
I think that's the point. I mean, I think, one of the reasons this story stood out to us is like, okay, so this is a tension that I think we need to live in as professionals, and especially professionals in the professional services marketing space. Like, yes, being on LinkedIn does have its kind of like awkward moments, and sometimes you have to be a little bit more enthusiastic about work stuff than maybe you really are, Sometimes that's the case. But I mean, the bottom line is that in the professional services world, people are using it for meaningful networking experiences. They're doing it to share thought leadership. And if you can build a community of people in your space that can be more authentic and like bring real value and expertise to the space, we've seen with our clients, with ourselves, and from the data that actually it is a valuable marketing strategy that can't really be ignored. So if I actually go to the data from our most recent high growth study, number 2 on the list of marketing techniques that are used most often by the fastest growing firms is networking on social media. And then only just below that is actually promoting thought leadership on social media as well. And this isn't any social media. We also ask like, what platforms are you using? And LinkedIn is like the dominant one. So there's not really a question about what our data is indicating or saying there. LinkedIn is a space that really matters. I mean, with that being said, how do you guys handle that tension between, the cringiness of LinkedIn with the actual professional value that we know it has?
Yeah, well, Austin, let me go back to one of the points you just said about the authenticity piece, because I think that's so important and such just a key factor in how you do just that. Because it's at the very core of building these meaningful professional relationships and establishing your own strong personal brand. Because people, they want that transparency. They appreciate honesty, and this can make them more inclined to want to engage with you. And so then when you compare authenticity with educational, meaningful content, people, they begin to start to see you as a valuable resource, someone that they can trust for advice or for collaboration, which, as we all know, naturally translates into opportunities, whether it's a job offer, a partnership, a mentorship.
Some of these platforms can be their own worst enemy, though, with that, MB. LinkedIn was purchased by Microsoft in 2016, I believe, something like $26-25 billion. Makes sense. Software company is trying to get in on the game, especially with Meta, Facebook buying up everything, and Google already having their natural leg up in terms of search engine and so forth. But one feature that's stood out, and this is absolutely driven by Microsoft and their AI models, is LinkedIn is offering to provide AI services for your posts. So like type your type your thoughts into this, and LinkedIn will produce an AI print ready solution for you to get yourself out there in the networking space. And all I can think about every time I see that is cringe. So it's like, this is not authentic. It's not something that is almost certainly going to be tied back to the individual. And that's what these platforms are supposed to be. It's this collection of individuals connecting and conversating with each other.
I can give an example for the balance between being authentic, but also like staying professional and kind of creating some value. So at the beginning of the year, my wife and I welcomed our third kid into the home. On the professional side, Hinge was releasing our brand new research report. We were also launching a brand new podcast. There was like all this stuff, and it was the beginning of the year, and you have like those New Year's resolution like fuzzies kind of going. And so like I made a post about that where I was just like, carrying a lot of positive energy and kind of like, all about new beginnings kind of into the space. And I can tell you that since that post, and I was a little, kind of apprehensive about sharing that on LinkedIn, I've had like 3 or 4 people in my professional network, clients, prospects, actually bring up like, hey, like I saw that, you guys had a new baby and stuff like that. And it didn't feel weird or awkward. It was like, great. I'm glad I could shed a little bit of light into kind of who I am as a person, but also celebrate some of the stuff that we have going on professionally as well. I think that would be my example. Any other final thoughts from you guys on this?
You guys want me to share one more best of LinkedIn?
I do. Yes.
Yeah, let's do one more. Why not? People want to see it.
These are my favorite stories.
Give the people what they want. All right. This one's from Jason. According to Best of LinkedIn, this was 2 days ago. We're a third connection. Here's what happened in the 6 months after I got locked out of the house by my ex. I moved in with my parents, lost 10 pounds, and I picked up my belongings a month later. Then 2 months after that, he started seeing a therapist and feels better with the direction things are going. Take a guess what Jason's title is underneath his name.
Does it have to do with B2B sales?
No, it's a men's divorce coach.
Oh, gee.
Oh, man. Also, I love how your voice immediately changed as you started to read his post.
Well, we've got a great segment coming up here with our friend, John Tyreman. If you are a professional that has thought about, should our business start a new podcast? Should we consider this for experts that work at our company? Should we think about maybe advertising on podcasts? I think you're going to get a lot of value out of our conversation coming up with John, so stay tuned. Hey, Joe, MB, do you guys smell that?
No. What is it?
It is not the smell of this not so great Brazilian coffee that I'm drinking. You know what it is? It is the smell of fresh research, baby. I'm talking about the high growth study. Okay, if you've listened to some other episodes, you know we've been talking about this in the middle of every episode. We reference this data in every episode. That's because every year we conduct this research on the professional services marketplace. And this year it was the 10th edition of the studies, a huge milestone. Over the years, Joe, what is it? 50,000 different
and
companies
climbing.
50,000 and climbing organizations that we've researched over the years. This year, we had a great sample. If you want to know what the fastest growing professional services firms are doing with their marketing and with their business development, what do they got to do, MB? What do they got to go do? What do they got to go download?
The high growth study.
The high growth study. It's obvious.
No one does it better, baby.
No one does it better. So go to hingemarketing.com/high growth, and you'll get the executive summary of the research report totally for free. And if you want to dive a little bit deeper, there are industry-specific reports: consulting, architecture, engineering, and construction, technology, and software. We got you. It's all there. We've got 6 different industry reports on sale if you want to cut a layer deeper, and those are available as well. So we hope you pick those up. We hope you download the executive summary no matter what. Let's get back to the episode. All right, I want to welcome to the Spiraling Up podcast, Mr. John Tyreman. John is a professional services marketer and podcast strategist with over 10 years of experience helping firms win new business. He leverages his expertise in podcasting to help businesses build trust with buyers, showcase their expertise, and generate content. He currently hosts 2 podcasts, Breaking Biz Dev and Podcasting in Professional Services. And I don't think it will be hard for people to put one and one together. John was definitely very helpful in helping us make this podcast a reality. So, John, we're really excited to have you here on the podcast with us today to talk about all things podcasting and professional services firms. But first, I want to ask you, we just had a segment where we were talking about how LinkedIn can sometimes be a space that can be a little bit cringy. I know you spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I'm sure you've seen some stuff over the years. We wanted to ask you before we dive into today's segment, what's the cringiest thing you've seen on LinkedIn? Come on, man, tell us the real deal. What have you seen?
Man, I've seen some really creative things on LinkedIn. And hats off to Logan Lyles. I think he's a great creator on there. But there have been some really cringe things that I've seen. A few years ago, like there was a bunch of tech layoffs, and there was this one crying CEO, and he would, did the selfie video of him crying because he had to let go all of it, like half of his employees, and that was super cringe. He went viral, and I'm sure that he probably, found some opportunities from it just by sheer happenstance, but that was super cringe. Probably the most that I've come across.
10 and 10 cringe.
I'm sure that someone will probably beat that at some point, but
He's going to get tagged in some sort of video that we put out for this now.
God.
He's going to come find you, John. No, it's so funny. You use that example, and it just comes straight to my mind. I remember watching that. I might even have interacted with you about it too, because this was years and years ago during the COVID layoffs. But yeah, I can't get that fit. How could you sit there and even just turn the camera on to watch yourself do that? It's beyond me.
I mean, I understand being vulnerable, but that's just a little forced,
All right, team. Well, I've got a question for you. Do you guys have your lab coats ready? How about your safety goggles? Because it's time to play Marketing Mythbusters. All right. Yeah, you remember Mythbusters, beloved TV franchise. And similar to the show, we're going to dive into the world of marketing folklore to separate fact from fiction. John, as our guest, we are going to present you with this challenge, right? We're going to present you with some common myths or some widely held objections that people have in the space of podcasting in the marketing world. And it's your challenge, man, to use your expertise, data, real world examples, experience, whatever you've got in the bag of tricks to either confirm or debunk these claims. Do you think you've got what it takes to play Marketing Mythbusters with us?
The first image that comes to mind is that bald guy with the mustache, right? And so I feel like I fit the part of that right now. I'm ready. Let's go, man.
Awesome. Well, MB, I think you've got the prompts ready for today. We've got some great things to tee up for John here.
Yep. All right. Well, let's dive into it then. I've got a couple good ones here for you. All right. Let's start with this one. John, some people say podcasts, they're just entertainment. They're great for storytelling or comedy, but they don't really work for serious B2B or professional services companies. What say you?
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to bust this myth. Well, first of all, I just want to call out that storytelling is a critical part of new business development. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from storytelling and apply to business. But that as an aside, business podcasts are the 4th most popular genre of podcasts, and that they represent about 8.9% of all podcasts. So I think it's after society and culture, arts, and entertainment, I want to say. Those are the top 3, and then business podcasts are the next biggest one. And so I think that in of itself, just to show you that there is a lot of business podcasts out there. But to your point, Mary Blanche, is okay, well, is there demand for it, right? Are people actually listening to that? So if we dig down a little bit further, and we were just talking about LinkedIn, actually. They put out a study of, I think, 2,700 users, and they found that 44% of department heads, VPs, owners, and C-suite individuals listen to podcasts. So I think that if we look at it through the lens of the most popular professional networking platform, I think that just goes to show that there is a market, there is demand for business podcasts.
Part of that myth, I think, is just generated by how people utilize and what their experience is with the platform. One of the things that has stood out to me, and I think, Austin, you already teed it up. John was a big piece of how we came to put this podcast together. I think it was originally generated over Tex-Mex and beers, right? Like all good ideas.
That's right.
But I was one of these folks, right? Where I remember, John, specifically, I was questioning, gosh, I just can't get into business podcasts. I consume blogs, I go to webinars, I do all those types of things. And I struggle to make those connections for the reasons of entertainment, authenticity, and those types of elements. The storytelling piece that you just referenced, that's what stands out to me, right? Because there's a difference between having a story to tell and just standing in front of a microphone or sitting, I guess, in front of a microphone.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's where you can draw from your experience and you can tell stories of your and I think that shows if we're talking about professional services, you're in the business of expertise. And so the extent to which you can reference stories that show that you have helped a certain clientele in the past and that you know what to look for and you can guide them around corners, that goes a long way, especially in a medium like a podcast where it's a little bit more informal and it's a little bit more conversational. Mm-hmm. I think it's like kind of like hanging out at happy hour with folks that are in your industry, right? That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I feel that way too. So I'm kind of was on the opposite side of the coin from Joe initially when we started talking about this, because for me, podcasts have, for a while now have just been such an integrated part of my week over week. I do have my favorite business podcasts that I listen to, whether that's, I only have 10 minutes, I'm going to pick up the kids from dance, or if I'm on a trip and I get to listen to, maybe like binge 3 episodes in a row, but just find so much value in them.
What's your favorite show?
It's called the All In Podcast.
The All In Podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've
it's a
heard
bunch of
that
PE guys, and they just talk about what's going on in tech, IT, what they're up to. And they call themselves the besties, so that you can tell they're all really good friends. And so you'll get 10, 15 minutes in and you're just kind of laughing along with just like their banter in general. So kind of speaking to a little bit of what you were saying too, John, it's just, you just kind of feel like you're almost right there with them at happy hour, just kind of, listening in. So
I feel like I've listened to that one too. That's the billionaire besties, right? They're all like the Silicon Valley billionaires. Yeah.
Yep.
John, I think a lot of the myths that we'll talk about today, they come from a place of hesitation, right? What would you say to the part of like the role of how podcasts don't just have to stay on podcast platforms, but that episodes can be content that contributes to other parts of your marketing funnel, marketing channels that you're doing? I know that when we were working with you, that was kind of a theme that you kept talking about. I think it's really important that people get to that. I don't think we have any kind of questions that they're going to touch on that topic. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you normally frame that up for people and like handling the objection?
I subscribe to the challenger sale mentality of know you, like you, trust you, especially in professional services where buyers first they need to know you, then they need to like you, then they need to trust you in order to do business with you. Mm-hmm. And so the way that I look at it is to get to know someone, first you need to become familiar with them, right? So familiarity is kind of a stepping stone to trust. And so if you're talking about what I call content distribution, that's what I like, that's the term that I use to talk about what you're talking about, Austin, I think. Mm-hmm. And on my podcast, Podcasting and Professional Services, I interviewed Ross Simmons. And he has this mantra, create once, distribute forever. It's the name of one of his books that he just wrote. And it's this concept of, you record a podcast or you create a long form article or a PDF or something. And that's your core content that you can then repurpose, copy and paste a paragraph from the text and that becomes a LinkedIn post, right? Or in a podcast sense, create a long form 45, 50-minute conversation, and then chop that up into 10 different clips that you're pushing out on social media. And so then that signals, folks that are on LinkedIn, for example, since we were just talking about that, they're scrolling through their feed and then they see your face on a screen and they hear your voice. And they're like, oh, okay, that's Austin, that's Joe, that's MB. And then a couple weeks later, they see it again and again and again. And then in a couple weeks, they listen to one of those video shorts. And then that captures their attention so much that they click through and listen to a full-length podcast episode. And then they subscribe to it. And so that's kind of the bridge between the familiarity to knowing you to liking you. And then when you have people that subscribe to your show, you can build trust with them over time through your conversations, through the value that you provide to them via guests, via the topics you talk about. So that's how I think content distribution overlays into that trust equation.
Mm-hmm.
What's up next, MB?
All right, let's see. Next up, some people say that you need a huge audience to start a successful podcast.
The people are saying it.
That's the people are saying.
That's what the
That's
people
the myth. We're going to bust it up. All right. So I will say that podcasts are a phenomenal way to engage your existing audience. So if you have an existing audience of email subscribers, then a podcast is a natural transition to engage more deeply with them. That being said, you can use a podcast to accelerate your networking growth. So what I mean by that is like, do you want to be a guest on my podcast? That is a much stronger offer than, hey, you want to hop on an intro call? You want to hop on a Zoom call?
Amen.
So you're providing value to the other person as opposed to asking for value, asking for their time. You're saying, hey, I'm asking for your time, but I'm going to give you, a video of you talking about you, right? So that's like, first of all, like I think that because of that, your connection rates are much higher with people that you reach out to. Those connections are much deeper because you're having deeper conversations, right? And you're promoting them. You're putting value into that relationship. And so, like, if you're playing on the cognitive bias of reciprocity, right, with that upfront deposit into that relationship. So it's a way to accelerate your networking growth. I'll give you an example. So I'm working with a fractional chief operating officer, and he is a EOS integrator.
Yeah.
And he wants a referral source for him are EOS implementers. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to network with these EOSIs, we're calling them, and that is a referral source. That's the target guest for the show. So we want to deposit value into those referral sources so that they think of this fractional COO and want to refer them.
I was just going to say an EOS, for those who are running to Google real quick, is the entrepreneurial operating system, and a fairly, honestly, fast-growing way of how especially small businesses are bringing into practice a process that allows them to grow quickly. So I can see great synergies here, especially if that's your target audience and that's who you're trying to speak to, in being able to kind of talk around that experience, that expertise.
Yeah, and so it's a faster way to network with a key referral source, deposit relationships into them, and then the strategy is that he will be the first fractional COO that they think of.
What did Mr. EOS's we'll say visibility look like before the podcast? What was he rocking in terms of email, subscribers, so on and so forth?
It's a small email list, a few hundred on an email list. He's a fractional chief operating officer, and he wants to build a firm. So he's working with other fractional COOs, and then when he finds a good fit, he refers business to them, but it's sort of a consortium of these different fractional executives. So it's an interesting model, and it's cool how these different solo business owners are kind of working together in that capacity.
What's growth looked like since you've launched the podcast?
We launched it last week. So
okay. All right. Well, we'll have to do like an overlay of this video that says results are in or something like that. We can get a Maury overview.
There you go.
All right, let's go to number 3. So only charismatic personalities can be successful podcast hosts?
Oh, I love this one because that is a myth, and I hear that all the time. And I would say that it's not entirely true. Now, energetic, outgoing, well-spoken, charismatic people, yes. Like you could do a monologue, you could be on a co-hosted commentary, you could do an interview series if you can learn to shut up. But like there are other podcast structures for different personality types. So like are you provocative and snarky? Are you really funny? Do you have like good one-liners, zingers? Be a co-host with another expert or someone else who's a little bit more straight-laced, right? And so to provide that kind of like fire and ice or like banter. Maybe you're really introverted and really curious and inquisitive. Run an interview series and ask damn good questions, right? So like there's a podcast structure for almost any personality type.
This is about tailoring to your strengths, essentially.
Exactly. Yes.
Do you have an exercise you typically go through, John, to help identify what that is, those strengths?
My typical sales process when I'm working with experts or marketers who want to launch a podcast either for themselves or for someone within their organization, there is really a vibe check that goes on. And it's not really like a personality test per se. It's more of a feel thing. But, you get to know somebody and you get to understand their personality a little bit, and you can kind of connect the dots and see, okay, this person would do really well in these scenarios, under these conditions, under this framework, with this supporting cast. And then the vision kind of comes together because there's a lot of different ingredients that go into launching a podcast, as you all know, just
Absolutely.
from going through this experience.
John, when we were writing the Visible Expert book, we did like a kind of a similar thing adjacent to what you're saying about the different types of personality types being kind of different types of podcast hosts. We did something similar there with kind of talking about visible experts and how visible experts, there could be different kinds of visible experts. I think the examples we use in the book, we talk about the bridge builder. So that's somebody who's kind of building a bridge between two different topics. The laser, so that's usually like a specialist, someone who's like highly like targeted on one little area. The curator, which is like maybe that role of like bringing other experts into the fold and like interviewing them. Like I like that example that you used. Then you have your first movers and your contrarians, which I think maybe of the different visible experts we talk about tend to be the ones with the most boisterous personalities.
Yeah.
That could, make for good, podcast hosts or running a good podcast. I just like the comparison there that, you've kind of figured out how important that is in terms of designing a podcast for a different company, like that fitting it to the personality really matters and makes a difference to kind of the output and the quality of it. When we're talking to people about being a visible expert, it's the same thing. Like, what are your skill sets? What kind of way do you want to go to the marketplace and talk about your expertise? So I love the parallels there that, what we saw with the visible expert kind of aligns with the podcasting angle as well.
Well, and then to add on to that, Austin, I think in the first Visible Expert book, there was like those three core skills, right? Like writing, speaking, and networking. And then you kind of like layer on from that. It's like, okay, well, if you're really good at speaking, then what kind of a speaker? Then look at it through the lens of that personality. Are you more of a bridge builder, a laser, a curator, a first mover, contrarian? Or the networking angle too. Like I could see these bridge builders being like really good interview hosts and like making connections with different guests. Whereas like the curators could curate industry news and then kind of like broadcast it or present it or add their own twist to it. So there's a lot of different ways that experts can tap into their expertise and their personality at the same time. And that's like the combination. That's what's so beautiful about a podcast.
I love that.
Love that too. All right, now I'm going to go on to the next one. This is a good one. All right, creating ROI from a podcast is nearly impossible, and it's too much work.
Well, you can get ROI from a podcast, and there are a number of different ways you can realize that return on investment. So I'll give you one quick example before we dive into some more of the tangible things. One of my clients is in his late 50s. He's actually turning 60 this month, and he does not want to travel anymore to speaking engagements. He's just tired of flying all around the country, going to these speaking gigs, and has to pry speaking fees from these associations. And he's done with it. He's fed up with it. So we launched a podcast about 6 months ago, and he recently went to the biggest conference in the country. Now, it's the Ground Transportation Podcast, and we recently did this like challenge, like, hey, get a selfie with us on the showroom floor, and enter for a chance to win a plug for your business on the podcast. They were inundated with people trying to get selfies with them. So much so that Ken, my client, he had to fake that he was on the phone and like walk off the floor. And so long story short, like that was just kind of one signal that the podcast is helping him achieve that goal of delivering his message in a way that he doesn't have to do it at those speaking events and speaking engagements. So if you're, cutting airfare, right, is a form of, cost cutting, you could look at that as return on investment or the time it takes to travel and do that. I thought that was a really funny story, but if we get back to some of the more like typical like ROI, like direct attribution, lead generation is the first place that I would point to, right? So referrals from guests that you have on, the guests themselves on your podcast. After a few years, your listeners could become guests or could become opportunities, right? Hey, I've been listening to you for years and the opportunity to work with you just hasn't come up, but finally, like I'm in this space now where it makes sense to work together. Let's talk.
And that mirrors a lot of how we see some of these other visibility tactics that make up marketing strategies pay dividends too, right? Especially that last one you referenced. You were talking about the idea of trust building, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea that these are folks that are getting to experience you in a setting that doesn't feel overly salesy, that doesn't feel like they're going to have to hit ignore on a phone call that they're not quite wanting to do because it doesn't really make sense to them yet. And yet they just keep seeing it show up on their caller ID. So I feel that in entirely. I think it also plays really well with what we're seeing in these shifts in Google's algorithm and how people are using other tools or tactics to make decisions. Mm-hmm. So I think I've found a way to reference SEO is dead in some form or fashion on every podcast we've done thus far, which of course is overblown. But the idea of SEO being just the primary focus of groups, and that's going to just bring you the leads. They're going to keep rolling in. Not so much. People are leaning on generative AI. They're leaning on other tactics. They're trusting networking venues, whether it's digital or in the traditional sense, the floor taking selfies with your guy. So yeah, I can just see that this is what part of that diversification strategy would be. You just have to understand it's part of a long game. If there's not a direct, we're getting the guest, for example, to be your business opportunity, or the networking that you can potentially get from guests bringing and referring other folks in.
So I want to touch on that because yes, it is a long-term investment. However, there are ways to kind of offset some of your production costs. So sponsorships are one avenue to do that. And especially with business podcasts and even more so in professional services where the audiences are so niche and narrow, sponsorships, value is in the eye of the beholder. So if you are a professional services firm, let's say you're an accounting firm, and you launch a podcast and you want to find ways to offset the production costs to extend the runway of your show so that you do have that calendar time to be able to prove return on investment in the form of leads. Then you get a sponsor to offset that cost and that extends your runway. So maybe you partner with a technology, maybe it's like a SaaS platform or like a blockchain ledger. Maybe you're in a progressive accounting firm that wants to go on the blockchain. I don't know. But that's kind of the point, is it can extend your runway.
So what you're saying is you can sponsor more than golf tournaments.
Yes, and you should.
I was actually having a conversation with a client recently, and when the topic of podcasting came up, I thought they were going in the direction of talking about how they were thinking about starting a podcast for their technology company, but what she was actually saying was no, their company had actually aggressively gone out and started buying advertising space on a lot of other different podcasts out there in the space. And she said the results that they were getting from that like far outpaced the spend that they were getting or that they were putting into like
On other
LinkedIn
channels.
advertising
Yeah.
and Google pay per click. I thought that was very interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of professional services firms out there that would benefit from exploring that space a little bit. There's probably some untapped ground there.
Well, you know why that is because you've got highly engaged listeners that are in tune with a highly niche topic. And that's the ingredient right there. Just to drive this point home, on both of my shows and then on many of the shows across my portfolio, the consumption rate on YouTube, the YouTube variation of the show is much lower than the consumption rate on the audio side. It's like 30% YouTube, 80% on the audio side. So people are listening much deeper into the episode via audio. So if you're advertising on, long form audio podcasts, then yeah, I could totally see how that's proving to be like much higher ROI.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. All right, I think we've got one more. Is that right, MB?
We got one more. So last one, podcasting is a fad that will soon fade away.
All right, buckle up. We're getting into our time machines here. Okay, we're gonna go back to 1895.
We're going way
All
back.
We're
right.
going way back. That's
very-
when the radio was invented.
Oh.
Okay. Now we all know that. Like, I think it was when I was hosting the Visible Expert podcast. Kelly and I were interviewing Scott McCain, and he is part of the National Speakers Association. And he likened podcasts to on-demand niche radio. And I thought that was such an accurate description of what podcasting is. And so if we kind of like think about radio has trained humans to like be familiar with that format, right? So it's, generations of humans. And digital radio, actually, so recorded radio and then transferred from computer to computer actually predates the internet. And it was first called a podcast in the early 2000s, I think 2001, 2002. That's right around when the RSS feeds became available. And then Apple actually introduced the podcast app on their phone, I think in like 05 or 06. So they've been very forward thinking in terms of like this as a content vehicle. According to Edison Research, so every year they do this study called the Infinite Dial. And they found that in 2025, more than half of Americans 12 or older will have listened to podcast audio in the last month. And so, like, we as a nation in the United States are getting used to listening to podcast audio. I mean, just look at the impact on the last presidential election, right? I mean,
Yeah.
both candidates were on all sorts of podcasts. And then I think like Musk is on Joe Rogan, Trump's on Joe Rogan, Vance is on Joe Rogan. Like that seems to be like
It became a whole talking point, right? There was this
Right.
whole drama, like Harris didn't want to join or Joe didn't want to have her. It was moving around, and that became a bigger talking point than the actual issues. So I think the podcast piece there is so interesting.
Well, the fact that they both targeted podcasts as their media channel of preference, I think,
Right.
spoke volumes about how they see like the American media and how they consume content.
And even though both of them did go on different podcasts, one of them did a lot more than the other, and he was the one that won the election.
Yeah.
So it's
Caller Daddy
definitely
didn't get it done.
No, I don't think Caller Daddy was enough.
No. Bummer.
All right. Well, John, this has been great. I mean, I would say of the myths that we've proposed, you've fully busted them, but there may be some marketing teams out there that are still wondering like, okay, how do I actually take steps and make this a reality? Like the idea of starting a podcast is such a big endeavor that it feels very mythical, right? Like, how am I going to find the right people to do it, organize the right things? And honestly, the long-term commitment of it as well. I mean, I'll be transparent. When we started planning for this podcast, I mean, the thing that I continually went back to in conversations with you and with Joe, MB, and the whole team was, we've got to be looking at this for like, you know, an investment for the foreseeable future. I'm curious, you know, kind of, you know, to those out there who may still be doubters, but maybe not even doubters, maybe they're bought in, but they just don't know what to do with this, you know, do next in terms of making the next step. Like, what would you encourage them to do? Like, how can professional services firms take the first step to assess if podcasting is the right fit for them and then actually start making it happen?
Well, first, I think you've got to have somebody who's willing and able, right? So someone needs to volunteer to get behind the mic. That's like the first step. If someone's willing to do that and walk that path, then I would say the next step would be to record a pilot episode. And much like we did when we were producing, launching Spiraling Up, this show, I do offer a pilot episode package to my audience. And it's not a free engagement because there is a lot of work that goes into producing a pilot episode. But that's, I do offer that so that firms can get a taste of what it's like. They can go through the motions, they can feel it before they invest in a long-term investment, because you don't want to commit to a 6-month, a 12-month investment before you truly understand what it's like to go through those motions. So that's what I would recommend, is coming up with a pilot test to make it real before you go all in.
Yeah.
Sorry, Austin, just one thing that really, hearing you say that, John, it just makes such perfect sense. The most impactful business development and marketing technique we saw in our high growth study recently was live product and service demonstrations. So while there's a bleeding line there between whether it's something you do as a part of your business development or if it's kind of the appetizer, that is so logical, right? You just want to have an opportunity to experience this to see if it's for you without necessarily having to go all in.
All right, John, where can people learn more about what you do, and how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way for people to learn more about your services and what you're up to?
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out redcedarmarketing.com. Subscribe to Breaking Biz Dev wherever you get your podcasts. Spiraling Up is a lot about marketing for professional services. Breaking Biz Dev is more on the business development side of things. So if you enjoy this show, chances are you'll probably enjoy that show as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your contributions here, breaking some of these myths, letting us know, kind of what the world of professional services marketing and specifically podcasting is looking like. Good luck with everything that you're doing. And to all of our listeners, if you made it this far in the episode, we just want to thank you for listening. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you like the post. Make sure you download the episode. Leave us a rating. If you leave us a rating, we'll read it on the next episode. We're building a community here. We're having some fun. We appreciate you guys listening to this episode of Spiraling Up, and we will see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.